World of Warcraft Beyond the Dark Portal by Aaron Rosenberg and Christy Golden. Chapter 23.
Village up ahead!
Barak reported, leaning over with his hand on his legs as he struggled to catch his breath. Dried blood still coated his side beneath his rough bandages they rigged for him after Kargath Bladefist had ordered the Shattered Hand clan to abandon Hellfire Citadel. Yet, yet Barak was actually one of the least injured among their little band.
I'll go on myself,
Kargath told Barak and the others.
I will make better time.
He glanced around at the other orcs.
Heal quickly. When I return, we'll set out for the Black Temple.
As he walked, Kargath wondered how it had come to this. True, when Ner'zhul had given him those orders to stay behind and delay the alliance at Hellfire Citadel, it had been obvious the shaman did not expect them to survive, nor was death in battle a problem for Kargath or any of his Shattered Hand orcs. But dying with honor was one thing, dying for no reason was another, and leaving Ner'zhul and the others defenseless against the alliance would bring dishonor on them and their entire clan, even if they had died in the process. That was why, when he had seen the alliance had conquered the citadel and shattered all their defenses, Kargath had gathered what warriors he could find and had set out for the Black Temple itself. But he had fewer than he had hoped, and many of them had been so badly wounded they hadn't even survived the first night. Now, he had only a handful left, none of them uninjured. He stalked on, a part of him noting the landscape around him. Most of Draenor resembled Hellfire Peninsula, with its cracked red ground and bare stretches. Why then was this region still so green? Lush grass cushioned the steppes, and clumps of bushes alternated with tall trees. Nogrand had clearly not been touched by the same desolation as the rest of their world. But why? It was ironic, in a way. The greenest, healthiest part of Draenor, and it was home to sick and weakened orcs as he crested a low hill. Kargath saw a village spread out before him. Its tightly built walls, domed roofs, and planked porches were in the same style of most orc villages, including his own. For a second, Kargath entertained the notion of bringing his warriors here, chasing out the current inhabitants and claiming the village as their own. They could let the war pass them by. Ner'zhul did not even expect to see them again, so he wouldn't be surprised when they never appeared. They could let the horde go on to other worlds and live out their days here instead, tending herds and crops and battling whatever beasts lived in the forest whenever they felt the old bloodlust rise. But no. Kargath scoffed himself. He had sworn an oath to fight for the horde. How could he live with himself? Forward. How could he live with himself or look at any of his warriors in the eyes if he did not give them his all? Besides, he thought with a shiver, claiming this village would mean facing its cursed current residents, and he didn't think any of his warriors were up for that. Walking down the hill, Kargath approached the village cautiously. He saw a few orcs moving around sluggishly, patches of brown against the green of their surroundings, but they hadn't noticed him yet. When he was still 100 feet or so from the nearest hut, Kargath slowed to a halt.
Yeah!
He shouted, breaking to a short spite of coughing as the deep breath exuberated his injuries.
Great Mother Gaia!
The orcs hadn't noticed either. No, the orcs he'd noticed either looked up, startled, then disappeared into the nearest huts. Hopefully they were summoning Gaia. Kargath thought bitterly. He doubted he had the strength for another shout right now. A moment later, the curtains over a hut entrance rustled, and they were pushed aside. Great Mother Gaia emerged and stomped towards him, squinting against the sunlight. "Who's there?" she called out, her voice as sharp as ever.
Kargath Bladefist, chieftain of the Shattered Hand clan,
he replied, forcing himself to stand up straight as she approached. "Kargath, eh? I've not seen you for many a year," Gaia commented. She finally stopped halfway between him and the hut and met his gaze. Her eyes were still violet. Kargath noted, and her long hair was still thick, if streaked with gray. She didn't look ill. Impatient, though, and the curl of her lip was that revulsion he saw there. "What do you want here?" she demanded, confirming his impression.
An alliance army has invaded Draenor,
Kargath told her, his sense of urgency wearing with the respectfulness his elder had drummed into him as a youth.
They've overthrown Hellfire Citadel, and we'll be marching on Black Temple soon.
Eh? And what's that got to do with me? Gaia asked, sniffing. Moments to war, the both of these places, were better off with them gone.
I need warriors,
Kargath explained, hoping he sounded confident, demanding rather than desperate.
Any orc who's able to fight must come with me at once.
Gaia stared at him, her eyes wide. Are you mad? She burst out. This is a village of sick, or have you forgotten that? She studied him, and a sly grin flickered across her lips. No. You can't see. You can see, you haven't. Or would you rather we continue to discuss inside one of the huts? When she shifted uneasily from foot to foot, her grin widened. As I thought. You know who dwells here. She grinned. Her grin turned to a scowl. And now you want to add to their suffering by dragging them into your foolish war. Why should they fight? Why should any of us? She glared at him. You invaded the humans' world. This is the consequence. Kargath felt his own lips pulling back with a snarl as his anger began to outweigh his fear.
We are all part of the Horde,
he reminded her sharply.
We are one race and must survive or fall together.
He studied her for a second, then switched to a different tact.
Ner'zhul says he can get us off this hellhole. If he can get to the Black Temple and hold off the Alliance long enough, he can open portals to other worlds. You could have an entire world to yourself for all you and your patience.
What's wrong with this world? Gaia responded. She gestured at the greenery all around them. I like it just fine.
This world is dying.
Only a part of it, she countered. The part you and your fool warlocks have tainted. Nagrand is as vibrant as ever. She looked smug. It is Magar, uncorrupted. And so are its people. They may be sick with regpox, even dying from it, but at least their poxed skin is brown, and they have not been fouled by the Horde's dark magics.
It is your duty,
Kargath insisted.
All your warriors must come with me at once.
Gaia laughed at him. You want them? She asked. Get them yourself. Drag them out of their sick beds, and you can take them with you to your war. Kargath glared at her. His anger was up now and overwhelming all else, including fear.
They don't look ill,
he said, staring past her at where many of the orcs she tended had emerged from various huts to watch the exchange. From here he could see that some of them were limping and others were bent or bowed or hunched, but they all appeared to have the right number of limbs, and at this point, as long as they could hold a club, he'd take them. He started toward his village, just as one of the figures stepped away from its hut and approached them. It was a male, a young warrior, and as he neared, Kargath could see he was tall and muscular. He was also staggering, swaying on his feet, and his brown skin was pale except where angry red pulses mirrored at it. Many of them seep in thick red fluid that looked more like tainted tears than blood. With a start, Kargath realized he knew the youth. It was Garrosh Hellscream, son of Grom.
What has happened?
Garrosh demanded, lurching to stop beside Gaia.
Why are you here? Is it the Horde?
A strange look came over the youth's face.
Is it my...
A horrible wet groan rose from his throat, drowning out his words, and then Garrosh fell to his knees, grasping as blood and bile spilled from his mouth, pouring down his chin and chest and soaking into the grass below. I warned you not to exert yourself, Gaia snapped steadily at him, with a hand on his shoulder. She did not seem concerned about the risk of touching him. The pox is still upon you, and you are nowhere near well enough to leave your hut yet. Then she glared at Kargath, a nasty smile on her face. Do you want him to join you for your battle? Are these the warriors you hoped to find? Kargath had recoiled when Garrosh started spitting up blood, and continued to back away now.
No. There are no warriors.
Disgust and despair added venom to his words.
They're not even orcs anymore! They are useless!
He glared at Gaia and Garrosh and at the other villagers behind them.
You pathetic weaklings!
He snarled, raising his voice as best he could.
Do the Horde a favor and die here. If you can't help defend your people, you have no right to live.
With that, he turned on his heel and stalked off. There was nothing for it now but to take his remaining warriors and disappear into the hills. He lacked the number to make a difference at the Black Temple, too. The more he thought about it, after being abandoned at Hellfire Citadel, Kargath felt that he did not owe Ner'zhul anything anyway. No. He would take what few soldiers he had left and find some place to hold up and rebuild someday. Someday they would be strong again, and then they would reclaim Hellfire Citadel and the rest of the land from there. And when he did finally die, Kargath vowed it would be on his feet. He shuddered what lay behind him. No matter what, he would not end up like them. We need to get you back to your bed, Gaia scolded Garrosh, though more gently now. Garrosh shook off her hands.
What did he say?
He demanded with a hoarse whisper, his throat still spasming after tossing out so much liquid.
What is it? Was it my father? Is he alive?
Gaia looked away, unable to meet the hope flickering in the boy's eyes. Was Grom alive? She had no idea. Not that it mattered. She had heard plenty about the older Hellscream over the past few years, about his savagery and his battle frenzy, and his appetite for violence. He had been the first to give himself to the Horde and to Gul'dan's foul magic. She knew, and it had corrupted him utterly. If he still lived, he would surely be beyond redemption. He didn't say anything about your father, she told Garrosh now, gripping his arm again and refusing to be put off a second time. I'm sure he is still alive and well, else Kargath would have mentioned it. Garrosh nodded and let himself be led away, his energy spent. Gaia's heart went out to him and to all the orcs she tended here. Would they survive the red pox? Some of them, perhaps, but not all. Yet a part of her couldn't help feeling that at least their deaths would be cleaner than those of the orcs whose souls had been so tainted. The marks showed through their very skin. She shook her head and continued walking with Garrosh, refusing to glance back to where the emerald-skinned Kargath was still marching away. Chapter 24. Ho, lads! Thrallin glanced up, surprised. It was overcast, and a shape had just dropped out of the heavy clouds, plummeting through the dark skies. The shout was all that stopped Illyria and her rangers from loosing arrows in the descending figure, and prevented Thrallin from ordering his men into defensive positions. Instead, he stepped back and waited, hands at his side, a small smile on his lips, as Skyri spread her wings and swooped in for a landing. Kurdran was already climbing down from Skyri's back while her talons were still digging into the earth and strode up to Turalian, where he and Illyria and Khadgar waited. Turalian's pleasure at seeing the dwarf was dampened, however, by the dwarf's stiff, slow gaunt, and changed to confusion by the strange, hunched figure that dismounted and scurried after him.
Hey, I'm glad to see you all,
Kurdran said, clasping hands with Turalian and Khadgar in turn, and kissing Illyria's hands.
And we're a near thing, too. For those green beasts captured me, they did.
Turalian frowned and studied his short friend. I'm glad you escaped.
Nay, rescued I was. And healed up right proper,
Kurdran corrected.
The lad Daneth sprung me, and stormed their great ruin aboot. Called Arkadun, it were. Found ourselves in a strange-looking friend there, who might teach even ye a thing or two about healing with your light. Good thing, too. I, wasn't that's me best.
Turalian looked with fresh admiration at his friend. What Kurdran had said amounted to a confession of being at death's door.
I'm glad, he said feverishly.
Hey,
yeah, need be so glad about the next part. Nazul got away. He and his pet Death Knight cast a spell that took him straight to the place called the Black Temple, and we couldn't stop him.
Turalian sighed and placed his hand on Kurdran's shoulder. Don't worry, Kurdran. I know you and Daneth did your best. I'm grateful you're all right. He ran a hand through his hair, thinking. Black Temple. Sounds ominous. What do we know about it?
Nae much. The young feathered creature here will take us to it.
Kurdran jerked a thumb at the figure who had accompanied him atop Skyri. It bowed obviously.
This is Grizik. He led Daneth into Arkadun, and then Daneth found his way to me. Grizik knows,
it stated, its voice high and reedy.
I tell you, Black Temple, I know what and where.
This is your benefactor? Illyria asked. The one who healed you?
Nay, that's a Draenei. And, it does get complicated.
Then what are you? Illyria asked softly, and Turalian realized her elven eyes had pierced the shadows of the heavy cowl that hid Grezik's face.
I Erakoka,
Grizik answered, flinging back his cowl, and Turalian tried not to start at the stranger's long beak and feathered hair.
We born of this world, as are orcs. We long have Erakoka kept to ourselves. Little we have do with orcs or Draenei. Then orcs rose up, band together, forming horde, slaughtered Draenei. Arkadun was a Draenei burial city,
Kurdran explained.
So Grizik told me. And Black Temple, theirs as well,
Grizik added.
Though it was not called that then. There Draenei made last stand, and there my brethren and I too came to fight orcs.
His eyes glittered with what Turalian took for rage, though there seemed something malicious in them as well.
We failed, though not from lack of arms. Orcs have sorcerer, Gul'dan. He is very strong. He altered earth itself, raising great volcano in our midst. Now
his small eyes clearly blazed with anger.
Gul'dan, eh?
Kurdran swung the sack down from his shoulder, opening it and pulling out the skull.
Here's all that's left of him. He won't be causing you any more trouble.
No, Khadgar, sorry. Here's all that's left of him. He won't be causing you any more trouble. The young old mage told the Aarakocra before dropping the skull back inside with a quick concealing look of relief. Grizik's eyes were wide.
You slew Gul'dan?
He asked, his voice a breathy whisper. No, Thrall admitted. Someone else got to him first. But we have destroyed the Horde's power and broken one of its major strongholds. Now we just need to reach the Black Temple, find Ner'zhul and kill him as well. The Aarakocra bobbed its head.
I can show you way,
he assured them. Thralian caught Curdran's eye, and the Wild Hammer leader shrugged. Thralian understood. The clever dwarf wasn't sure whether to trust Grizik either, but what choice did they have? Thank you, he told the Aarakocra. We welcome your help. He turned to Curdran. We'll draw up a rough map tonight, based on Grizik's information, he said. Tomorrow, I want you to head back to Daneth. We'll decide where to meet up for the final assault. Curdran nodded.
Aye, lad. 'Tis a fine plan,
he agreed.
Now, who's got the ale for me and some food? Once I'm refreshed, I'll tell you the full of a trek, and the Battle of Arkandun.
Thralian smiled. I can't wait to hear it, he told the dwarf. And it was true. He caught Illyria's eye and smiled as she slipped her hand into his. Tomorrow they would begin the march again, but for tonight, at least, they could sit, drink, and listen to the Wild Hammer's no doubt colorful tale. Several days later, they rode between two low mountain ranges and saw a wide valley stretching out before them. Curdran had found them when they were almost level with what Thralian now knew the orcs called Hellfire Citadel, and the Dark Portal. Grizik had led them far further south than east, skirting the waters of the Aarakocra had told them were called the Devouring Sea. There, at the very edge of the land, stood the Black Temple, where the Shadowmoon Valley ran up against the mountain and dropped off into a raging sea. And it was there that Daneth and the rest of the Alliance army were waiting for them. Daneth and the others had not been idle. Thralian saw as he reined in. A crude but effective camp stood near the southwest edge of the valley, and thick, long walls were already half erected around it. Curdran's idea, Daneth said as he approached them, clasping Thralian's hand in green. He felt we needed a place where we could keep an eye on things across the valley. And this struck us both as a good vantage point. Thralian nodded. It was indeed that. From there they could see all the way across the land's edge, including the massive volcano rising up in the center and blowing smoke and ash and lava in every direction.
Hey, and it's best was where someone didn't need to set foot on the ground, Curdran added as he joined them. That lava's green, if you can tell from here, and the very ground saturated with it.
Khadgar nodded, and Thralian noticed the pained expression in his friend's face.
Fell magic, he whispered hoarsely. The purest I've ever seen.
The Archmage shook his head. I don't even know what sort of spell Gul'dan worked to cause this. It's a violation of nature itself. No wonder this world is dying. He frowned at Curdran. Keep your people as far from that thing as possible, he warned, and don't enter the valley any more than necessary.
Hatch. Aye, lad. We'll steer clear, well clear, Curdran assured him. The good news, though, is that we've already scouted the valley for ye.
He produced a roll of parchment and showed them the map he sketched out.
The Black Temple be there, at the far east end, he said, gesturing towards where a massive dark structure could be clearly seen across the valley. And there's no easy way out from it either. Creeping through the valley, the big horseshoe it is, and its open end points this way.
Any sign of Ner'zhul? Illyria asked.
Aye, he's there, Curdran answered. And those Death Knights as well, plus some orcs, though not many, he grinned. We've got them pinned in. They be going nowhere.
Thralian glanced over at Daneth, who nodded. We laid siege to the temple as soon as we arrived, he explained. I didn't want to risk them getting reinforcements. Good, Thralian turned to the others. We'll need to get over there ourselves. Khadgar, you're the key here. We need you to take out Ner'zhul and stop his spell. Illyria, you and your rangers protect him from long-range attacks. Shoot down anything that even looks his way. I'll be right beside him to take care of anything close by. We smash through the defenses, find Ner'zhul, kill him, take back the artifacts, and get the hell out. Agreed?
Absolutely,
Khadgar agreed, and the others nodded as well. Good, Thralian sighed, and said a quick prayer, calling down the holy light protection upon them all. He felt it pour over them all, warm and calming, and thanked it. He clasped hands with Kurdran, Daneth, and Khadgar, then turned to Illyria. She smiled bravely up at him, but she knew, as he did, the risks. Illyria. Thank the light they had not been so stupid as to still be shunning one another. Instead, they had found strength and comfort in each other. He folded her close for a long moment, resting his chin on her head, on her shining hair, then tilted her head up to kiss her. Pulling back, he gave her his best smile and hefted his hammer. Let's go. They charged across the valley, the remaining Alliance forces right behind them. Only a handful of men stayed behind to guard the camp. As they raced around the volcano, Tyrolian saw the Black Temple for the first time, and only his faith kept him from jerking his horse to a stop, then kicking it into a gallop in the other direction. The place was enormous, towering over even the volcano journeying up from the valley floor, carved of some stone that had perhaps once been bright, but was now coated in ash and other foul substance that swallowed the light. It loomed like a piece of shadow giving solid form, squat and ugly and dangerous, mocking the army that threw itself against its walls. Tyrolian could tell that every sacrifice was heavily carved, though he could not make out the details yet. And the top of the central portion had Protronus, had Proturius that reminded him of a hand grasping to the sky. Even as Tyrolian tried to take it all in, his horse stumbled, and he was nearly thrown as the earth rocked beneath him. Lightning, green and loud, ominous, crackled with darkness instead of illumination, shattering the skies. His horse wicked in terror and reared. Its rider only marginally less frightened, but it did its best to calm the animal. What is going on? What is going on? He shouted to Khadgar over the rolling thunder. The sky's all right, he shouted back. I fear that. His words were snatched away as the earth shook again and the skies flashed green. Tyrolian saw another flash, and his head whipped up. The portion that evoked the image of a hand reaching for the skies was glowing. Oh no, he breathed and turned to Khadgar. I was right, Khadgar yelled. Ner'zhul has begun the spell. Can we stop him? We can, Khadgar answered grimly. Just get me there in time. Consider it done. Tyrolian raised his hammer high overhead and summoned his faith, channeling it into the blessed weapon. The hammer surface began to glow, the light spreading as it grew until it shone so brightly the volcano dimmed alongside it. The Orc and Death Knights battling before the Black Temple turned away, blinded by the light, but did not sear Alliance eyes, and his soldiers cheered as Tyrolian galloped past them, his hammer burning a path through the temple's defenders, till one figure stepped out of its path.
Your little light does not frighten me,
Terran Gorfin called out, a jeweled truncheon in his hand. It was obvious to anyone with eyes that the Death Knight was lying. He had let his hood fall back, and his hideous, decaying face with burning red eyes were plainly visible. That face was contorted with pain, and the body strained as if wanting to flee of its own accord. Gorfin lifted the strange weapon he held. It glowed with a multicolored light, and that varied radiance battered at Tyrolian's glow, attempting to overpower it. The holy light is all that you are not, monster, Tyrolian shouted in reply, pointing the hammer at Gorfin and loosing a bolt of light like a missile. If you do not fear it, then embrace it. The burst struck Gorfin, but he swept his truncheon before him, and it scattered Tyrolian's attack, diffusing the brilliant white into rays of color. Then the Death Knight struck in turn. He leveled his truncheon at Tyrolian, and a shadow emerged from its tips, engulfing the Alliance commander. Tyrolian felt the darkness constrict, smothering his light and his limbs simultaneously, and fought against it, wreathing to break free. Air passed beneath him, and he hit the ground hard, rolling and struggling. Clearly the attack had carried him from his horse, but the darkness stayed on and pressed him down to the earth. He gasped for air, but his lungs refused to inflate. refused to obey his commands. He'd fallen. Of course he had. He was not even good enough to stay atop his horse. What kind of general was he? His troops would die too. He led them straight to their deaths. Lothar would be ashamed of him. Trollian spasmed on the earth, willing himself to breathe, but tendrils of darkness wrapped around his chest, crushing it snake-like. They would wound up around him, pinning his arms to his sides, forcing the way into his mouth and nostrils. His eyes, it burned. Tears spilled from tightly closed lids, but only inflamed the fire. And so he would die. A failure, a catastrophe. All those deaths would be on his head, those innocents in other worlds gasping in horror as the vast green tide swept over them. The men who had believed him when he told them the light would be with them. Light. What light? Where was it now? Now that it mattered. Illyria, dead too, should be joining her family, cursing him in whatever afterlife the elves believed in. She never loved him. He saw that now. He was a toy, one she would have outlived, one she'd have moved on from. Khadgar, Kurdran, Danath. The dark tendrils tightened. Trollian opened his eyes, staring blankly. I'm sorry, Lothar. I failed you. I'm not you. I led them. He blinked. He led them the best he'd known how. No, he wasn't Anduin Lothar, the Lion of Azeroth. Only Lothar could be Lothar. It would be the height of arrogance to assume otherwise. He was Tyrallian, and the light was with him. He hadn't failed him yet, and not when he prayed with his whole heart. Just ask. All you have to do is ask. With a pure heart. That's why Lothar picked you. Not because he thought you'd be him. Because he knew you'd be you. Trollian took a shallow breath. Constrained by dark tendrils, he prayed. He opened his eyes, and he knew without understanding how he knew that they were shining with pure white radiance. He looked down at the tendrils of darkness, and they melted, retreated as shadows must ever retreat before the light. His chest heaved with a great breath, and he clambered to his feet and grabbed his hammer, swinging it through what remained of shadow. The attack had lasted only a few seconds, though, and it felt like an eternity. Gorpine had used the diversion to creep closer, and when Tyrallian could see and move freely again, he realized the Death Knight was only a few feet away. His red eyes widened as Tyrallian took a step forward. Clearly, he had not expected the young Alliance commander to win freely so quickly, if at all, and he was not prepared for the heavy blow Tyrallian's hammer struck him full in the chest. Trollian was sure he heard bones snap beneath the worn armor, and the Death Knight stumbled back, though he did not fall.
You cannot win,
Gorfing hissed through gritted teeth.
I am already dead. What is the worst you can do to me?
His Trenchon jabbed forward, catching Tyrallian in the stomach and doubling him over, and Gorfin's hand brushed the back of Tyrallian's helm, instantly pained blossom in Tyrallian's head, as if a vice had gripped his helm and was squeezing it tight onto his temples and skull. Stars exploded behind his eyes, and he felt the world tilt crazily around him. In desperation, he swung his hammer again, a mighty two-handed arc, and felt the heavy head strike something solid. There was a rattle and a grasp, and the pain vanished. Blinking away spots and taking in deep breaths, racking breath to clear his head, Tyrallian glanced up in time to see Gorfin stagger a step, one arm hanging limp while the Death Knight was off balance. Tyrallian lurched forward, hammer raised high. He summoned his faith to him again, and the radiance shone from his limbs and from his weapon, too bright to look upon as he advanced upon his foe. The Death Knight cried out, raising his hand to shield his eyes from the radiance, which was now actually starting to make his flesh smoke and curl. "By the light!" Tyrallian cried, praise, prayer, and promise all in one. The light flared brightly, so brightly, and he brought the hammer down It did more than simply crush the reanimated body. It cleaved through it, like carved an arc through Terran Gorfine, ripping through him until his dead flesh fell in a soggy reaping heap. A horrible wailing pierced Tyrolian's ear, and he staggered back, staring in horror and disbelief as a jagged shriek wisp that was Terran Gorfine's soul twisted upward from the wreckage of his body. The paladin lifted the glowing hammer and swung once more, but he was a fraction of a second too late, and the spirit was gone. Shrieking in pain and frustration, fleeing to the crackling green and black sky. "Come on!" came Illyria's voice, startling Tyrolian's. His heart swelled to see her. He quickly leaped atop his horse and galloped towards her. Riding ahead of them was Khadgar, and they caught up quickly. The Death Knight had been the temple's last barrier. Now they were within the Black Temple itself, and faced the long stairs winding up towards the top, and the sickly light that pulsed from the height. Illyria, Khadgar, Daneth, Kurdrin. Damn it, they were not going to die here. With a physical shake of his head, Tyrolian dispelled the last of the shadows holding on him, gripped his hammer, and rode towards his destiny. Chapter 25. Ner'zhul stood atop the roof of the Black Temple, in the center of an inscribed circle. Above him, obscured by the lower clouds and flash of green lighting and the great conjunction involving the Watcher, the Staff, and the Tome, was reaching its peak. And as above, so below. Also below, beneath his feet, Ner'zhul could sense Draenor's ley lines crossing over and around and through him. And as he closed his eyes, he could feel this entire world trembling in his grasp. This was why the Draenei had built the temple here, and why it was the only place where he could cast this spell. From here, he could literally tap the entire planet for the power to cast a spell. Arrayed around him in the large circle that surrounded the first were several of Gorfine's Death Knights, a few warlocks who had survived Doomhammer's wrath, and a handful of his own Shadow Moon orcs. The latter group stood in the third and largest circle, facing outwards, weapons raised. They were there for protection, while the others aided Ner'zhul in tapping the planet's power and performing the ritual. They had already been casting for an entire day, since the moment the celestial alignment was right, and only the energy flowing through them kept the old shaman from collapsing from fatigue or hunger. As it was, his skin tingled and his hair danced about him, as if carried high by the unseen winds. They were nearing the end of the spell. The Alliance had crashed against Black Temple's thick walls hours before and were in danger of breaching its defenses at any moment. But they would be too late. Ner'zhul thought triumphantly. He raised the scepter of Sargeras in his right hand and the eye of Darlaron in his left. Both gleamed brightly, inner light shining from the head of the scepter and dancing from facet to facet within the eye's violet center. Those two artifacts focused the ley line energy, concealing it into almost physical form and impulsing the strength into Ner'zhul's limbs. Now, his entire body was thrumming, and he knew that he was no longer standing on the stone roof, but hovering just above it as the energy lifted him from the surface.
No!
He shouted, touching the tip of the scepter to the center of the eye and feeling the rest of their stored energy flash through his limbs and into his heart and mind. He knew his eyes were glowing bright, brighter than the sun, and he could see the lines of magic etched upon the world and through the air. See the souls of those surrounding him, see the connection between them and this world, and between this world and the rest of the cosmos. He could feel the curtains surrounding Draenor separating it from other realities, and with a single, quick, slashing gesture of the scepter, he tore through those curtains, spreading them as easily as he might slice through a thin parchment. The world shook. The ground trembled, the sky rumbled, a terrible grinding sound echoed up from far below, and met an ear-splitting shriek descending from above the clouds. Draenor screamed and thrashed in pain. The other participants staggered as the Black Temple shifted, many of them falling to their knees. Ner'zhul too staggered but managed to stay upright, bowed by the power coursing through him. He could feel the magic reaching across reality like a fishing line cast into the void. It leaped forward, Draenor's own energies giving it vast momentum, and hooked into something solid. Another world. The line grew taut, and with a twang that vibrated right through him, a responding core raced back down the line and tore open a hole in their reality. A rift. It was a rift. Ner'zhul recognized the feeling of it, the raw power that frayed air and earth and nature, the throbbing link that bound this world to the next. Beneath the skull-face paint, his lips split into a broad smile, and he closed his eyes, drinking in heavily. Feeling of success. He had done it. He had opened a rift, not just one. He could sense other rifts appearing all across Draenor, like tiny bubbles emerging from the sea and bursting open when they touched the raw air. Like lightning streaks from a storm that blanketed the entire earth, each one burned in his mind like a new volcano. He could send scouts through each rift to report back on the worlds they found. Then he would choose the most likely and lead the horde through to a better place, and perhaps another after that, and after that as well, until his people had many worlds as they wanted, as many as they could comfortably hold, until each clan had its own world if they liked. Then no one would be able to stop them. Oberus, one of the many who had been guarding the spellcasters at this time, said,
"This is our new world."
Indeed. What they could see through the undulating rift was not pleasant. It was not much, but enough to be disturbing. Something fluttered and loomed up then was gone. A sickly-like surge dully, then vanished.
"This doesn't look like anything we—" "Silence!"
Ner'zhul cried, whirling to face Oberus.
"We!"
And in that moment of inattention within his grasp, the eye trembled. Ner'zhul frowned and clutched it harder. It seemed to writhe like a fish, and before he realized what had happened, it leaped from his hands, flew through the air, and came to rest at the hand of a tall, broad-shouldered man with white hair and violet robes. A staff in one hand shone with power, and his eyes blazed with far more hidden depth within them. A human wizard, and he had literally snatched victory from Ner'zhul's grasp. Behind the mage stood a man in full armor, carrying a hammer that glowed with a blinding white light. Ner'zhul realized this man was not just a warrior, but akin to a shaman, except the forces he tapped were somehow on the grander scale than a mere planet. The elven female who stood beside them had no such magical abilities, but her face showed righteous anger, and she had an arrow knocked and aimed directly at him. Ner'zhul trembled. How dare they? How dare they interrupt his moment of absolute glory? Ner'zhul realized he felt no fear, no worry, just absolute outrage. "The eye will not serve you when you are dust," he cried, and let the outrage take him. It blazed through him, pure and hot and deadly. With a cry, he lifted his hands. The tortured rock and stone obeyed in agony, cracking beneath the intruder's feet. Barely in time, the Alliance intruders leapt aside, rolling to come up with weapons at the ready. But Ner'zhul was not done. Not yet. He was just getting started. The rocks that had cracked now rose up and hurled themselves at the Alliance interlopers. Wind and rain whipped around them, snatching them up to hover helplessly in the air before slamming them mercilessly down on the unyielding stone. Ner'zhul took great pleasure in watching them suffer. It was with effort that he turned back and yelled, "Through the rifts! Now! Glory and fresh worlds await us!" Oberus gaped at him. "Kill the Alliance.
"Kill the Alliance! Let us gather a horde! You cannot possibly mean that only we few will escape! What about our brothers, who fight even now? Grom and the Warsong are still on Azeroth. There are females and children scattered all over. We cannot abandon them! To do so would be the most gutless, cowardly.
Something snapped in Ner'zhul, something that had been holding him down. He suddenly realized it was only now that he was free of guilt, of shame, of trying to still do good for his people, that he realized what a burden it had truly been. He had once accepted death as part of the cycle, then feared it. Then realized he was the bringer of it, and all the heavy weight that implied. No more. He was free. He didn't even favor Oberus with a retort. Ner'zhul extended his hand. Lightning balled in his palm and raced in a crackling arc towards the other orc, slamming into Oberus' chest with a thunderclap that hurled him backwards. He crashed into the wall and slid down, a smoking black hole in his chest. He did not rise. Whirling, Ner'zhul turned to those around him, who stared at him in shock.
The other orcs are lost. They have served their purpose. From this point on, all that we gain will be ours alone. I am the Horde, and I will survive. Choose me, or choose death.
When they did not move, he growled and lifted the scepter. Now they did move, as if suddenly freed, rushing toward the flickering rift. It hovered a few inches above the roof's surface and rose to nearly 10 feet. Ner'zhul went last, holding the rift open with his power and his will, then stepped into the rift himself. He had just enough time to gasp before the rift vanished behind them. So, I am back. I know it's been a good couple of months. I've moved house, kind of using a new camera set in the minute, some older cameras that I had lying about, so I don't have to move one camera up and down stairs consistently every time I want to do this. Which is kind of why it's more of a black and white, but I think this will give a bit more of a shitty feel. I mean, if I added some actual light to it, you might get some color, but get grainy. But yes, moved house. So for the next 6 or so months, I should be able to get through some more of these books and get some more through readings done. Sorry for everyone for not being able to do this for a while, but it's been a stress for 2 fucking months of trying to find somewhere to live and eventually getting somewhere and moving. Still kind of doing some stressing at the minute, trying to get everything in place. Everything's not exactly where we want it, but we're getting there. I think it'll be one more session with this book, and then we'll be on to the next one, which will be The Day of the Dragon. But yes, thanks everyone who's kind of sticking around and hoping for this. If you're watching this, please like and subscribe. Please like this video. Please subscribe to my channel. And also, if you get a chance to go subscribe to my other channel where I play, gotta remember it that way, D&D with a bunch of my friends on Geeky Rollers. If you like this if you're liking into this kind of stuff, you're probably gonna like that as well. So please, like, subscribe, share as well out, because I'd love this to get out as far as many people possible. And until next time, I'll be seeing you all soon.